Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine, Volume 5, and we're starting with Chapter 156, so I hope you all enjoy and I can't wait to see your thoughts and reactions once we're done. Chapter 156, Sister-in-Law. The heir consort, Lu Yizhi, was Xiao Jiming's childhood sweetheart, and the two had gone on to live in conjugal bliss after their marriage. She was renowned in Libei for her virtues. When the princess consort of Libei had passed away from illness, Xiao Chuye had still been an ignorant brat. As the saying went, an elder sister-in-law was comparable to a mother, and that was precisely what Lu Yizhi had become to Xiao Chuye. Aside from being Lu Guangbai's younger sister, she was also Qi Juyin's bosom friend. The carriage, accompanied by soldiers of the Libei armored cavalry on both sides of the public road, rolled to a stop outside the city walls of Cizhou. Lu Yizhi sat within and listened to the sound of approaching footsteps beyond the curtain. Someone called out, "Vice Commander." "Vice Commander." Lu Yizhi clasped her hands and thought in delight. "That's him." Zhou Gui stood outside the carriage and bowed respectfully. "Greetings to your ladyship. It must have been a long and arduous journey. Please, come into the city at once." Lu Yizhi had never met Zhou Gui, and naturally had never heard his voice. At the call of Vice Commander, she took Zhou Gui to Bi Shenzichuan. Oh God. The carriage drove toward the city gate, and as the wheels crunched over the gravel, she quietly lifted the corner of the window curtain and caught a glimpse of Zhou Gui's back. Zhou Gui was facing away from her, so Lu Yizhi couldn't see his face. But she thought Shenzichuan was rather different from how Xiao Chuye had described him in his letter. She let the curtain fall, then, after a moment, lifted it again. This time, she saw Zhou Gui's face. He was much older than even Xiao Jiming, of average stature, and had a lean face with a trim beard to match. Lu Yizhi was so stunned her mouth fell open. Fortunately, she still had her wits about her and remembered Shenzichuan was supposed to be 2 years younger than Xiao Chuye. Just then, Zhou Gui bowed and moved over slightly to make way for a figure in white. This person was tall and slender. Although he was largely facing away from the carriage, she caught a glimpse of his visage. Lu Yizhi observed carefully and reflected that Aya truly hadn't been bragging. He was indeed awfully good-looking. She could only presume he took after his mother. Unaware that Lu Yizhi was studying him, Shenzichuan spoke to Zhou Gui in hushed tones. "I'd like to ask the advisors to draft a new document today. All other matters can be postponed." As obtuse as Zhou Gui might be at times, he was under no illusions about whom Lu Yizhi was here to see. He kept pace with Shenzichuan as he walked. "I'll deploy some men from the Yamen to the Vice Commander's manor." Shenzichuan blinked in surprise. "Whatever for?" Zhou Gui's palms were sweating as he answered, "To protect you." Speechless, Shenzichuan ran his eyes over the retinue of 500 men from the Libei armored cavalry. If they were really here to capture him, Zhou Gui couldn't stop them even if he tried. Well, at least he's trying. Xiao Chuye hadn't sent any letters after the start of the 8th month, so Shenzichuan could only guess what they were doing here. Not particularly concerned, he reassured Zhou Gui. "Perhaps the heir consort is merely passing through. One can travel through Cizhou directly to Chazhou, and it's far more convenient to enter Qidong from that direction. There's no need for your excellency to worry. Libei is not our enemy." As it turned out, this spontaneous remark from Shenzichuan hit the nail on the head. Lu Yizhi was indeed heading south to go to Qidong. Lu Pingyan had been implicated in Lu Guangbai's desertion, and the imperial court had ordered him taken into custody for questioning. Instead of complying, Qi Juyin had detained Yingxi, the military inspector eunuch assigned to the Bianzhuan commandery, and demanded her own explanation from the Ministry of War. She claimed Yingxi had repeatedly interfered in the affairs of Bianzhuan and questioned his involvement in the matter of the moldy provisions. In the interim, she'd brought Lu Pingyan into her own camp to look after him. Qi Juyin had sent a letter to Li Bei several months ago, asking Xiao Jiming to fetch Lu Pingyan away as soon as possible. Lu Guangbai's desertion was a serious matter, and the ramifications hinged on whether or not he would throw in his lot with the 12 tribes of Biansha. The empire had had no news of the garrison troops of the Bianzhuan commandery, but simply based on Lu Guangbai's act of striking out into the desert, it seemed possible that he was defecting to the enemy. The court minister's request to put Lu Pingyan on trial was merely a means of holding him hostage in Chudu, so they'd have the leverage to negotiate with Lu Guangbai in the future. But the missive relayed by the Ministry of War was, upon its arrival in Qidong, entirely ignored by Qi Juyin. At this juncture, the embroidered uniform guard ought to have been deployed to carry out the arrest via an imperial edict. Yet no such edict was issued. When Zhongbo's troops had been routed 6 years ago, it was on the authority of an imperial edict that the embroidered uniform guard, then led by Jile, had detained Shen Zichuan for interrogation. This had required not only an arrest warrant, but also an official writ of arrest issued by the Ministry of Justice at the behest of the emperor, as well as the emperor's orders in ink. After Li Jianheng's death, the Empress Dowager had shouldered the mandate of heaven in his place. The court had proposed that the Empress Dowager and Grand Secretariat jointly issue the paperwork in place of the Empress personally penned approval. But Qi Juyin had made it clear she would not accept this. She would acknowledge orders issued by the emperor and no other. Until the embroidered uniform guard came bearing an edict drafted by the emperor's own hand, she would never release Lu Pingyan. Han Cheng, in personally leading Hua Xiangyi's honor guard, was also a messenger sent to negotiate with Qi Juyin. Though the Empress Dowager offered generous remuneration for Qidong's compliance, no agreement was reached. And as Qidong was now reliant on Qi Juyin's troops, they didn't dare force her hand. When Xiao Jiming had sent his people to inquire about the situation on the pretext of sending wedding gifts, Qi Juyin had sent an unequivocal verbal reply back with his messenger. Lu Jinyin's trip was thus for the precise purpose of bringing Lu Pingyan back to Li Bei. This detour to Zizhou was part of her secondary mission, helping her father-in-law investigate what kind of person Shen Zichuan might be. Naturally, Shen Zichuan couldn't allow Lu Yizhi to spend the night at a relay station like any common traveler. He made a special point of tidying up a courtyard in the manor and invited Lu Yizhi to stay on Xiao Chuye's behalf. Lu Yizhi noted that the upturned eaves of the manor were in Xiao Chuye's preferred style, and that both the interior and exterior were organized and well maintained. She recalled the letter Xiao Chuye had sent before her departure, of which 3 pages were entirely given over to praising Shen Zichuan. Lu Yizhi stepped down from the carriage, and Ding Tao joyfully scampered up to greet her. Delighted, Lu Yizhi pulled him along as she gave him a careful once-over. "Taozi, you've also grown a head taller. Why didn't you come home with the second young master?" "Master commanded me to stay put here at Gongzi's side," Ding Tao replied. Lu Yizhi called for her maidservant to bring some candy for Ding Tao. She settled in a chair, clasped her hands together under her sleeves, and asked gently, "Does the second young master stay here often?" Ding Tao hemmed and hawed, having been forewarned by Qiao Tianya of the tenor of this visit. But he didn't dare lie to the heir consort. "Back at home, you often came over to play and keep me company," Lu Yizhi said, softening her voice further. "The grandson heir always asks about his Taozi. He's constantly wondering when you'll come home and play with him." She turned her face aside as she spoke, a little sad. "It has been 6 years since I saw our little Taozi. Now he's grown so distant from me." "No, not at all," Ding Tao rushed to reply. "Your ladyship always treats me well. I remember even before I left for Chudu, you told Jinge to look after me. I never forgot." Lu Yizhi looked back at him. "You're young. As your elder brothers, it's their responsibility to take care of you. When I heard how Aye was bullied in Chudu, I couldn't eat. I was tossing and turning all night. There wasn't a moment I didn't worry." "Master wasn't injured when he left Chudu," Ding Tao responded immediately. The 8th grade battalions couldn't catch up to us, and Hanjin, the one who chased us, is still locked up in the jail here in Suzhou. Your ladyship needn't worry. Master is a very formidable man now." "If Aya is so impressive," Lu Yizhi answered tragically, "why did your journey take so long?" "Gongzi was injured," Ding Tao explained. "When Han Cheng ambushed Master in the capital, Gongzi helped a lot. But that Han Cheng is abominable. He even used Gongzi's teacher to threaten him. Gongzi couldn't save his teacher, and after leaving Chudu, he fell terribly ill. None of the physicians along the way were any help, so we couldn't travel too fast." Lu Yizhi didn't know who Shen Zichuan's teacher was, but this tale alarmed her. Her expression betrayed genuine concern as she asked, "What happened after? Has he recovered?" Ding Tao was unsure how to explain. "He seems to have recovered, but Master and Grandpa Ji both say he hasn't. When Gongzi was in Chazhou for business a few months ago, he fell sick again on the journey. Master flew into a rage when he came back." "I knew it," she thought. It was as she'd expected. Xiao Chiye did come by often. "I've never seen Aya angry. But Master was in a hurry that time. He only stayed a night before he had to leave." Ding Tao thought for a moment before adding in a small voice, "He got in by climbing over the walls." Understanding dawned on Lu Yizhi. "Then, are you happy here? If you want to come back with me, I'll bring you along." Ding Tao hesitated. He did want to return to Libei, but he couldn't up and leave Suzhou. He'd made plans with Li Xiong to go fishing outside the city in winter, and had promised Ji Gang that he would learn a new set of boxing moves before the new year. Most importantly, Shen Zichuan never deducted anything from his allowance. He never even scolded him that time he'd kept the frogs in Shen Zichuan's courtyard. Observing him, Lu Yizhi turned pensive. She patted Ding Tao on the head and didn't press him further. If Ding Tao was unsure, it meant Shen Zichuan treated him well. He must not be a difficult person to get along with. At the very least, he had exceptional patience with this half-grown youth. Lu Yizhi considered all this in silence. Here was a good-looking, domestic, patient, and loyal man who valued ties of duty and friendship. Not only could he keep his house in good order, he also had a promising political career. He could keep Aya in check, yet he wasn't overly domineering. His health was poor, likely an old ailment from his early years in Chudu. But despite the many setbacks he'd suffered in life, he remained warm and amiable. "What a wonderful child!" Lu Yizhi clapped her hands together and exclaimed, "Quick, prepare brush and ink. I'll write a letter back to the homeland overnight. Have my husband delivered to his lordship on the front lines once he's read it himself." As a man not in Lu Yizhi's immediate family, it would be improper for Shen Zichuan to pay his respects directly. He set up a partition in the courtyard, dividing it into halves. With the advance notice he'd received that Lu Yizhi was passing through, the household had prepared a small feast to welcome their guest from afar, with Zhougui's wife pressed into service as feminine company during the meal. Madame Zhou was an astute woman. She praised Shen Zichuan to the skies in her private conversations with Lu Yizhi, picking a few choice incidents to recount. Lu Yizhi's initial impression of the Shen clan had been all based on Shen Wei. It was Xiao Chiye who sent her a letter overnight to expound endlessly on Shen Zichuan's virtues. At the end, he subtly divulged that he'd taken a beating from his old man on the front lines and been demoted. He omitted the part where he'd nearly died in Tudalung Banner and merely revealed that he was injured, making Lu Yizhi's heart ache so much she couldn't bear to reproach him. Lu Yizhi was only staying one night. The next morning, she would continue south to Chazhou. When the feast concluded, she summoned Shen Zichuan into the hall. The more she looked at him, the better looking she found him to be, and the more satisfied she became. Recalling Xiao Chiye's mention of Shen Zichuan's past, as well as the tales she'd heard from Ding Tao, her heart swelled with sympathy. Shen Zichuan thought the way the heir consort was looking at him was similar to how one might look at a rabbit. She was as gentle as possible, as though even a slightly sterner expression might frighten him. "Vice Commander Shen," Lu Yizhi said softly, "I was the one who imposed upon you, yet you've gone to such trouble. I hope you'll accept this small token as a gesture of my gratitude." Without waiting for a response, she gestured for her maidservant to present the gift. It was a box filled with brocade, nothing unusual or rare. Seeing it was not too valuable, Shan Zichuan accepted it after some polite civilities. Only when he took the box himself did he register its heavy weight. When Shan Zichuan returned to the courtyard, he lifted the brocade out and found that beneath the fabric, gold and jade bracelets were nestled in the box's bottom, all intricately inlaid and exquisitely crafted. Fei Shang snuck a peek over his shoulder and marveled. Wasn't this the kind of heirloom meant to be passed down to a daughter-in-law? Of course. He didn't dare voice such thoughts. He silently shifted his gaze away, leaving Shan Zichuan standing in puzzlement. Chapter 157. Zhongxiong. When Lu Yizhi left Suzhou the following day, Shan Zichuan sent Fei Xiang to accompany her entourage with the embroidered uniform guard. His instructions were to escort her all the way into Qidong's territory. Outstanding official business from the day before had to be discussed, so everyone settled back into their customary seats in the study with the windows open. If I may, this is a new document for the Vice Commander's perusal. Zhou Gui placed the papers on the table. We initially planned to keep a separate register of undocumented migrants and increase the severity of punishments, but during our discussion with Yuan Zhuo this morning, he proposed we not govern them separately from registered citizens. Once you post the notice, the issue of household registration will resolve itself. Yao Wenyu coughed, then continued. It won't do to segregate them at that point. It'll only create unhappiness among the newly registered commoners. Besides, how will the Yamen differentiate between old and new citizens when they carry out their duties? After reading through, Shan Zichuan nodded his agreement. If anyone tries to take advantage of the situation for their own gain, it'll be a disaster waiting to happen. Once this matter is settled, the only issue left for us to handle before the end of the year is the survey of fields. The current land records were all tabulated during the reign of Yongyi. They're long outdated. Suzhou has been reclaiming areas of wasteland around us for 3 years in a row, Zhou Gui explained. The acreage of land has seen a significant increase. We should have resurveyed last year, but we didn't have the manpower. And with Lei Changming bearing down on us, it was delayed until now. He made some quick calculations. You're right. This task must be completed before the end of the year. If we attempt it once there's snow on the ground, errors are bound to rise. Suzhou now had plenty of Yamen runners and constables, but capable clerks were few and far between. Zhou Gui's advisors were mainly charged with deliberating official business and not responsible for the transcription of documents, let alone going out to survey the fields. The prefectural Yamen was short-staffed, and so was Shan Zichuan. After newcomers registered their households, screen them on the spot, Shan Zichuan declared. As long as they're literate, note their name down for future use. It doesn't matter if they're Suzhou locals or transplants from Dancheng. At this point, he looked around at the advisors. If anyone has a criminal history, we won't know unless they declare it, so we must be prudent during the vetting process. Some may also see this process as an opportunity. It's inevitable that there will be a few who attempt to curry favor with those making the decisions. I trust you gentlemen are all men of integrity who can distinguish between the crafty and the virtuous, and do the right thing. Seeing as he laid it out so plainly, no one missed his point. The advisors who'd been settled, smoking their pipes, now rose from their seats. A few looked embarrassed, no longer daring to treat this lightly. These advisors were all Zhou Gui's honored guests, with the freedom to enter and exit the manor as they pleased. Most were referred to as Mr., with their daily needs provided for by Zhou Gui. There were only 2 ways they could earn some spare cash. The first was by providing literary services or selling calligraphy and ink paintings. The second was by attending banquets hosted by the local gentry and elders, whereupon they would receive monetary rewards for the honor of their presence. Now that migrants were flooding in Suzhou, these advisors had been put in charge of household registration and screening potential clerks. No doubt some of these migrants would be thinking of sneaking them bribes in hopes of preferential treatment. Gao Zhongxiong was one of many unlucky people caught in this mess. Oh. Right. It didn't dawn on me when I read the chapter name Zhongxiong. The scholar's path had been a tumultuous one. He'd left his home in Yuzhou to enter the Imperial College, where he'd bragged that he and Qi Huilian hailed from the same hometown. As he had a bit of talent and learning, he had become a leading figure among the students in Chengdu and had even written essays in an attempt to challenge Yao Wenyu. Last year, when Xi Hongxuan had goaded the students of the Imperial College to protest over the matter of Shen Zichuan's release from the Temple of Guilt, Gao Zhongxiong had been the one kneeling at the very front, loudly condemning Pan Zhugui and Jile as traitors to the nation. Afterward, he'd been taken into the imperial prison, his future as a scholar destroyed. In a fit of anger, he joined Han Jin's camp as his advisor. It was his suggestion that had sent Han Jin straight into the imperial army's jaws. Han Jin had ended up captured and imprisoned in Suzhou, where he remained to this day, waiting for rescue. Fearing Han Cheng would blame him for his brother's fate, Gao Zhongxiong didn't dare return to Chengdu. Instead, he sought a favor from his maternal uncle in Dancheng and stayed as Pan Yi's advisor. At first, Pan Yi had planned to entrust him with heavy responsibilities, but many of the strategies Gao Zhongxiong put forth were impractical ideas that only sounded good on paper. Pan Yi gradually gave him the cold shoulder. Bullied and humiliated by the servants of the Pan Manor, Gao Zhongxiong could do nothing but return to his uncle's house. But when it rained, it poured. His uncle fell to his death one night after drinking. Gao Zhongxiong was a scholar whose arms were too weak for manual labor. His aunt disdained him for being useless and sought an excuse to send him back to Yuzhou. Gao Zhongxiong was too ashamed to return home to face his family and friends. He considered selling calligraphy and paintings to rent a few acres of modest farmland, where he would make like the sages of old and lead a simple, virtuous life far from the struggles of wealth and power. But to his great dismay, after saving enough money to rent the field, he only worked the land a handful of times before it was occupied by a local despot from the Fei clan. Gao Zhongxiong marched to the Yamen to lodge a complaint, but that very same night, he was cornered in an alley and beaten to a pulp. Even his house was robbed. Gao Zhongxiong was again driven out into the streets without a penny to his name. He finally wanted to return to Yuzhou, but had no coin for passage. Left with no choice, he fled Dancheng with the other migrants and came to Suzhou, hoping to try his luck. Old man Xu. Gao Zhongxiong stood nervously outside the door of the prefectural yamen. When he saw the man emerging, he quickly called out, "Any news?" He'd been a distinguished figure back in Chengdu. Yet now he had to humble himself when speaking to others. He wanted to ingratiate himself, but his pride kept him from going too far. So he simply stood rooted to the spot, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The yamen runner, surnamed Xu, brandished his broad wooden staff and shooed Gao Zhongxiong off to the side. Only when they were out of sight of the door did he hiss at Gao Zhongxiong, "What are you doing here?" Gao Zhongxiong was so humiliated at this admonishment that, for a moment, he couldn't lift his head. Gripping his sleeves, he forced a smile and finally managed to look up. "I passed by the wine shop earlier and brought some over for you to quench your thirst. Here, sir, have some." He presented the wine gourd with both hands, continuing only when he saw the other man's expression had softened slightly. "I've been in Suzhou a few days. About the matter I spoke of last time." "The matter you spoke of?" Runner Xu drank the wine, wiped his mouth, and flatly lied. "What matter is that?" "The matter of getting a job in the yamen." Gao Zhongxiong didn't raise his hand to wipe the man's spittle off his cheek. "Please do me a favor and pass a message on to the advisors. Just say I was formerly a student in Chengdu who had received critique from the Chief Surveillance Bureau since—" "Oh, that can be easily arranged." Runner Xu moved in closer. "Bring me 3 taels of silver, and I'll buy a few packs of tobacco for the gentleman. After that, you'll get in for sure." Gao Zhongxiong was taken aback, his expression a mixture of hope and sorrow. But I've already given it all to you. I have no more money." The old man's expression instantly turned cold. "How can you do anything without money? Do you think the advisors are suckers? They can recognize gold and silver as well as anyone. If I hadn't taken pity on you and helped you out, what could you do with this petty amount of silver? It's far from enough." Gao Zhongxiong grasped the man's arm. "I've already given you 7 taels of silver. You must have some news. You want to bribe your way in, but you can't bear to part with your money." Runner Xu threw the wine gourd back at Gao Zhongxiong and stretched his neck out to spit on him, his words contemptuous. "You'd have to lose that money belt just to piss or shit around here." This wily old Yamen runner had swindled Gao Zhongxiong of all his money. After hanging around with the other migrants all day, the scholar was as filthy as a beggar. As he stared at Runner Xu's wrinkly old mug, he again recalled the humiliation he'd suffered in Dancheng. Unable to contain himself, he charged toward the man and slapped him. "If you're not going to help me, give me back my money." Runner Xu never imagined Gao Zhongxiong would have the nerve to strike him. He jabbed a finger at Gao Zhongxiong's nose. "You, a filthy cheapskate like you, dares hit me?" He swung his staff at Gao Zhongxiong's waist, kicked him to the ground, and struck him viciously. Gao Zhongxiong was a scholar, not a fighter, and had been starving for days. He felt a stab of intense pain. The staff must have cracked his ribs. Rolling on the ground, he covered his head as he attempted to dodge the blows, crying so hard he could scarcely breathe. Even so, he continued to shout, "Have you no conscience? You cheated me of my last coins. Have you no conscience?" They'd begun to draw the eyes of passers-by. Runner Xu didn't dare make too big a scene, lest his colleagues in the yamen come to investigate. He tossed his staff aside and straddled Gao Zhongxiong on the ground, then gripped his jaw and shoved his handkerchief into his mouth to gag him. Gao Zhongxiong howled as he struggled, so the old man slapped him until Gao Zhongxiong's ears were ringing and his vision blurred. Blood seeped from the corners of his mouth. "I'm on official business here," Runner Xu called to the growing crowd. "This son of a bitch is a thief from Dancheng. I already caught him once. To think he has the balls to come and seek revenge." A groan escaped Gao Zhongxiong as Runner Xu grasped his collar and dragged him into the yamen compound. His cheek scraped the ground, bloodied by the rough gravel. He reached his hand out toward the spectators in a silent plea for help. Runner Xu kicked Gao Zhongxiong a few more times in the ribs and stomach for good measure. Most yamen runners were adept at detaining people for questioning. Teaching a frail scholar like Gao Zhongxiong a lesson was child's play. If he brought Gao Zhongxiong in and kept him gagged while he processed him with a thievery charge, he could throw him in jail. All he had to do then was to drop a word to the jailer he was on good terms with, and Gao Zhongxiong would get what he had coming. Whether or not he survived past the 8th month would all depend on Runner Xu's mood. As Gao Zhongxiong was being dragged across the dirt, Zhou Gui was returning with Shen Zichuan from the fields outside the city. The carriage had been obstructed on one of the city roads, yet another instance of the migrants causing trouble, Zhou Gui presumed. Shen Zichuan didn't say a word. It was Zhou Gui who hastily stepped off his own carriage, lifting the hem of his robe as he pushed through the crowd. "What's all this? Who's kicking up such a fuss outside the yamen?" "Your Excellency," Runner Xu replied, "I've caught a thief. He not only refuses to submit, he even struck me." Anxious and weary from the disorder in the city these past few days, Zhou Gui scowled. "Be that as it may, this is no way to handle it. What are you doing beating people in the streets? It's disgraceful." He glanced down at Gao Zhongxiong, intending to educate him next on the morals of a good citizen, but he remembered they were still in the way of Shen Zichuan's carriage, which oughtn't be delayed. "Hurry up then, bring him in. See that he gets a proper trial once he's cleaned up." Upon hearing this, Gao Zhongxiong thrashed with all his might, attempting to spit out the handkerchief in his mouth. Within the carriage, Yao Wenyu was discussing the clerk interviews they'd conducted over the past few days with Shen Zichuan. The carriage showed no signs of moving anytime soon. Qiao Tianya stepped over and lifted a corner of the curtain to report. "Master, they're still arguing. Let's take a detour." Shen Zichuan pushed the curtain higher with his fan. "What's the matter?" They're saying it's a thief. The Yamen runner arrested him on the street. Qiao Qianya ducked his head and shuffled out of the way so Shen Zhichuan could see. I didn't spot any calluses on his hands. He seems to be a scholar. Yao Wenyu, who rarely enjoyed noisy places these days, followed their gazes. The street was swarming with people, and he could see nothing at all. Let's go around. Shen Zhichuan let the curtain fall. Head straight to the Zhou Manor. There are still people waiting in the study. We should discuss the matter of the trade market before nightfall. Qiao Tianya ordered the carriage driver to turn around. As the wheels began to spin, they heard a heartbreaking wail. You people are trying to kill me! You're killing me! What kind of yamen is this? Merciful heavens! Must you reduce Gao Zhongxiong to such desperate straits? Yao Wenyu lifted the curtain again and said to Qiao Tianya, Go stop him. That's Gao Zhongxiong, someone who received critique on his essays from Cun Yu himself. He looked towards Shen Zhichuan. He's the one who led 3,000 students from the Imperial College to denounce Pan Zhugui that rainy night. Vice Commander, this is someone we can use. Chapter 158. Broken Jade. Clerks were not to be confused with government officials. They were at the bottom of the hierarchy, with no rank. But they could write and count, and were often more proficient in their knowledge of local law than the esteemed officials who sat high in their seats. As a result, too many clerks were adept at disposing of the evidence of their own fraud, oppression, and extortion of the commoners. Nor was it unusual, in places far away from the watchful eyes of the central administration, for those in such positions to cover for one another. When Luo Mu had first arrived in Chazhou hoping to clean house, there had been plenty of things he didn't manage to tackle. In part thanks to the impediment of the local clerks, the management of his subordinates in the local administration didn't merely affect the head official's political record. Sometimes, these same people could also become obstacles to the implementation of his policies. The imperial court had assigned a provincial surveillance commissioner to Zhongbo shortly after its fall, but by then, Dunzhou could no longer hold the other 5 prefectures in check. In recent years, the local administrators within the 6 prefectures, including the clerks, had become increasingly corrupt. Gao Zhongxiong was taken to a physician while Zhou Gui paced in the study. The advisor sat silent in the partitioned area, waiting for Shen Zhichuan to speak. This incident affected not only the screening of clerks, but whether the prefectural yamen would be replacing its current staff. When Zhou Gui spoke, his tone was grave. We were just discussing this yesterday, and already things have gone awry. Old man Xu alone has accepted bribes of over a dozen silver taels. There are so many men in the yamen. If others are taking similar bribes, how many of the clerks we employ as a result of this screening will be genuinely useful? Yao Wenyu took a sip of tea, put the lid back on his cup, and said nothing. Anyone with the most basic powers of discernment could see this case implicated Zhou Gui's advisors. Old man Xu was merely a member of the yamen staff, yet he dared use the screenings as an opportunity for brazen bribe-taking. Without a contact behind the scenes, his scheme would have been impossible. Yao Wenyu was Shen Zhichuan's advisor. If he spoke up and asked that the offenders be dealt with severely, he would be suspected of trying to supplant Zhou Gui's people. In all recent discussions, he had been seated securely by Shen Zhichuan's side as his counsel, but he was a newcomer and could not compare to the others in seniority. The reputation of unpolished jade Yuan Zhuo was known far and wide. Others had treated him as an immortal when he was beyond their reach, but now that he had fallen, he was a live target. Some jockeying among peers was to be expected, but if this led to friction between Shen Zhichuan and Zhou Gui, it would be to the detriment of all Cizhou. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt its debtor. Shen Zhichuan tossed his fan in his hand, his expression unreadable. Deal with the offender according to standard procedures. The screening process is a significant undertaking. There is plenty at stake. We cannot risk harming any of the diligent and hard-working gentlemen here out of paranoia. The advisors on the other side of the partition made not a sound, although a few inwardly sighed in relief. As long as Shen Zhichuan lived in Cizhou, He relied on Zhou Gui's power and influence. Of course, he would handle this matter with a soft touch. Corruption within the prefectural administration could and should be rooted out, but now was not a good time. If they cracked down and followed the trail of evidence, they might conceivably implicate over half the staff in Suzhou's prefectural yamen. How would they get any work done if the office was empty? But now Zhou Gui was the reluctant one. Vice Commander, it is precisely because it's significant that it must be investigated. We can't let these people destroy the ethos of the prefectural yamen. If some people imitate this behavior in the future, the commoners will be the ones to suffer. Naturally, it must be investigated. What I meant was that we should proceed by the book. Shen Zichuan called for more tea, then continued. Old man Xu has been taken into custody. If Your Excellency has misgivings, then by all means, send someone you trust to sit in and transcribe his interrogation. With the embroidered uniform guard conducting the trial, we will have results by tonight. Baseless accusations cannot be trusted, but conclusive evidence cannot be disregarded. Whosoever violated the regulations of the yamen will have to bear the consequences of their actions. The newly transcribed penal laws were just posted. This incident has come at the perfect time. Your Excellency can hold the trial before the citizens of Zhezhou. The more muddied the waters, the more important it is to sift until they're clear. But once the case concludes, we must not take rumors for truth and jump to conclusions. The yamen must not implicate the innocent. This trial must be undertaken as a warning, Zhou Gui said. Just so, Shen Zichuan concurred. Minor offenders shall be dismissed from their position, and serious offenders shall be exiled to barren lands. If public sentiment runs high against the guilty parties, an on-the-spot execution can also deliver immense satisfaction. A crash rang out from the other side of the partition, and the stunned gasps of advisors filled the air. What happened? Your Excellency, someone fainted. Several voices replied at once. These advisors had assumed Shen Zichuan meant to punish only old man Xu and show mercy to the rest of them. They hadn't expected he wanted to make a public example of them. How could an old lout from the countryside like old man Xu withstand the interrogation of the embroidered uniform guard? When Shen Zichuan had said they mustn't implicate the innocent, he meant not pursuing the matter further than this. But not a single person involved in old man Xu's bribery racket was going to get away with it. As they sat and listened, their horror grew. When Shen Zichuan uttered the words, "on-the-spot execution," one of them passed out cold. It was briefly pandemonium in the study. Elsewhere, Zhongxiong was grimacing in pain under the hands of the physician. After his wounds were tended and his meal was ready, he changed into a clean set of clothes with the help of the maidservants. He had always been one to place great value on health and wellness back in Chengdu. Although he was starving, he didn't gobble down his meal. When he finished eating, the maidservants led Zhongxiong to the courtyard. He didn't dare look around on the way. He knew Shen Zichuan was currently residing in Suzhou and was thus deeply apprehensive. As the man who had given Han Jing counsel on the pursuit and capture of Xiao Chiye, coming to Suzhou at all had been a risky move. Zhongxiong stepped into the courtyard and saw that the orange jasmine beyond the wooden railing of the veranda had all withered. No one had swept away the blanket of white petals, presumably at the instructions of the master of the house, that its natural fragrance might linger in the air. The soft green moss and fine gravel along the edge of the pond bridge resembled a plush new mattress. The sight distracted him as he ascended the steps, and in his moment of inattention, he nearly slipped. He awkwardly recovered and, sweating profusely, bowed to the maidservants snickering behind their hands. Wind chimes dangled beneath the eaves. Ding Tao waited for Zhongxiong to approach before he lifted the curtains and led him inside. Not knowing Ding Tao's identity, Zhongxiong didn't dare offend him. He lifted the hem of his own robe, intending to stride in, only to realize there was no elevated threshold at the door of this room. The interior of the hall was bright and spacious, bare of any valuable ornaments. Back in Chengdu, Zhongxiong had often heard that Shen Zichuan kept company with the likes of Xi Hongxuan. He was said to be fond of extravagance, carrying a small ivory fan at all times. Zhongxiong guessed that perhaps the owner of this manor was Zhou Gui. He took his seat, sitting upright and very still, his buttocks barely touching the edge of the chair as he watched for signs of movement in the courtyard. A short moment later, he heard the sound of wheels outside. Ding Tao, who had been under the eaves, stepped out to greet someone. "Young master." The curtain lifted, and Gao Zhongxiong rose to his feet. Yet the first one to enter was neither Shen Zichuan nor Zhou Gui, but a tall and wild-looking bodyguard. The guard didn't look at Gao Zhongxiong. Instead, he leaned over to take hold of a wheelchair and pushed in a green-robed young man with an overcoat draped over his shoulders. Gao Zhongxiong had already bent his knees to kneel, but when he got a clear look at the wheelchair's occupant, he couldn't help but gape. He took a step back, eyes wide. "Yao Yuanzhuo!" The exclamation put a frown on Shen Zichuan's face. He entered a step behind the wheelchair and removed his overcoat, heading straight for the seat of honor. Jiao Tianya pushed Yao Wenyu to the front, and the maid servants came forward to serve tea. Yao Wenyu balanced the cup in his hands and said with his usual mild expression, "It's been a long time. I didn't expect Shen Wei to have come to Zizhou too." Inexplicably, Gao Zhongxiong broke out in a cold sweat. He dabbed at his brow and hummed an acknowledgement. No longer daring to meet Yao Wenyu's eyes, he hastily paid his respects to Shen Zichuan. "Your Excellency." Shen Zichuan found this man's expression peculiar. After settling himself, he said, "There's no need to be so formal. Take a seat." But how would Gao Zhongxiong possibly dare? Since Shen Wei knows the vice commander, there's no need for me to waste time on introductions. Upon seeing Gao Zhongxiong's pallor, Yao Wenyu paused for a moment, then softened his tone. "Shen Wei, don't be afraid. I'm very much still alive." Gao Zhongxiong absently repeated, "Yes." "Yuanzhuo, what makes you say that?" Shen Zichuan asked. "I had a chance encounter with Shen Wei in Dancheng," Yao Wenyu explained succinctly. "The poison in my injuries acted up simultaneously, then gave him quite a scare." But if the nervousness with which Gao Zhongxiong fidgeted was any indication, it had been more than a chance encounter. After Yao Wenyu's legs were broken and he left the capital, he traveled to Dancheng, where he remained under the care of Pan Yi and Commandery Princess Zhao Yue. He must have encountered the poison that had so destroyed his health in Dancheng. But until now, he had never told anyone the story. Gao Zhongxiong, however, knew all about it. "I left Dancheng in a hurry. Are the commandant and the commandery princess well?" Yao Wenyu asked. At Yao Wenyu's gentle tone, Gao Zhongxiong gradually relaxed enough to answer smoothly, though he kept his head turned, too afraid to look at Yao Wenyu. "Yes, they're both fine." Shen Zichuan sensed a strange undercurrent beneath this exchange. The maid-servants had retreated. Ding Tao was idly striking the wind chimes under the eaves. They clinked noisily, as if buffeted by a gale. Jiao Tianya stuck his head out to chase Ding Tao off, and only then did it finally fall quiet on the other side of the bamboo blinds. There was no perceptible shift in Yao Wenyu's mood after hearing this news. He set aside his teacup and broke the silence. "When I arrived in Dancheng, the commandery princess looked after me for a time, but she is, after all, a married woman. It would be improper for her to become too involved. The commandant thus sought out his younger brother of common birth, Pan Yuan, who was still living at home. Pan Yuan was an idler who spent his days loafing around. Though he was fond of gambling, he was not a son of lawful birth and had only a small allowance. He relied on Pan Yi and his wife to repay the enormous debt he owed. Pan Yi placed Yao Wenyu in Pan Yuan's care, hoping his younger brother might be inspired to emulate the virtuous Yuanzhuo and thus better himself. He remembered Pan Yuan had been quite dedicated to taking care of their elderly father in the past, and could be considered a filial son. And indeed, Pan Yuan was attentive enough at first. Thanks to Commandery Princess Zhao Yue's exhortations, he didn't dare be negligent in his care of Yao Wenyu. And he didn't have to do anything personally. His only job was to watch the physicians and attendants to ensure they were timely with the meals and medicine and not loafing on the job. But over time, Pan Yuan grew bored and impatient and started to find excuses to venture out to gamble. Pan Lin used a prisoner's body as a decoy, but this didn't dispel Xue Shuzhuo's suspicions, Yao Wenyu explained. The commandery princess left in such a hurry, and it was inevitable that there were spies in her entourage. Later, the gambling den came hounding Pan Yuan for payment, and Pan Yuan went into hiding. He was too afraid to tell his family, so he often poured his woes out to me. Penniless as I am, however, I am in no position to help even if I wanted to. Gao Zhongxiong nodded. Pan Yuan sought me out as well around that time to borrow money. He said he'd been backed into a corner. He'd sold off the fields belonging to his branch of the family, but he still couldn't pay down his debt. I advised him to tell the commandant as soon as possible before more trouble came of it, but he refused. Yao Wenyu listened in silence. Not half a month later, Gao Zhongxiong continued, Pan Yuan suddenly came to me for a drink. He said his gambling debts had been fully paid. He'd met a generous benefactor who had extended a helping hand. Of course, I worried he'd been deceived by the gambling den, so I sounded him out about this benefactor. But he only said the man was a Longyo merchant from Chudu who'd asked him to run a small errand. Another half a month passed, yet Yao Wenyu's injuries did not heal. Instead, his health had deteriorated further. Commandery Princess Zhao Yue questioned all the physicians, but Yao Wenyu's condition showed no improvement. At the same time, Pan Lin met with censure in Chudu, and Pan Yi was impeached along with him. The issue turned out to be the Pan clan's fields in Danchang. Pan Xiangjie didn't dare speak up for his sons, terrified of drawing more ire down on his family. But even the Pan clan's repeated concessions didn't stop the storm from brewing their way. The imperial censors got so heated they demanded Pan Lin be suspended pending trial. The Pan clan was by no means innocent, and those were debts born of Pan Xiangjie's greed. It was obvious to Pan Lin that he was bearing the brunt of it because he was harboring Yao Wenyu. Pan Lin was incensed at the injustice and adamant on fighting Xuexiu Zhuo to the bitter end. It didn't take long for Pan Xiangjie to learn the inside story. Fearing the entire clan would be implicated, he sent a letter to Pan Yi in Dancheng overnight. In it, he demanded that Pan Yi send Yao Wenyu back to Chudu as soon as possible. Pan Yi refused. His defiance sent Pan Xiangjie into such a rage that he became bedridden from illness. While Pan Yi was caught in this dilemma, Commandery Princess Zhao Yue grew increasingly suspicious about Yao Wenyu's worsening condition. She bypassed the front hall and instructed her personal maid to call a physician from outside the manor to take a look. Yao Wenyu had no wish to get into the details. After a moment of silence, he simply said, "The commandery princess was worried Chudu would use the pretext of inspecting the fields to come and capture me. She had initially wanted to send me to convalesce at a country manor that came as part of her dowry, but her suspicions with regard to the medicine meant she could no longer trust the servants of the Pan Manor. She prepared travel expenses and entrusted someone with the task of smuggling me to Jincheng, where my late teacher's old friends still reside. But misfortune never came singly. His entourage saw that Yao Wenyu was not only seriously ill, but lacked the use of both legs. Almost as soon as they left the city, they forgot every word of the commandery princess's instructions and ran away with both the travel expenses and carriage under cover of night. Yao Wenyu had been abandoned in the dark. All that remained, other than the donkey, was the kitten in his sleeve. He was used to sleeping in the wilderness with the earth as his pillow when he wandered the mountains and plains, but his experience now was poles apart. For the first time in his 24 years of life, he confronted his own uselessness. Stripped of his reputation, he was nobody. Unpolished Jade Yuan Zhuo. At that moment, Yao Wenyu loathed that name to the core. It was a humiliation carved deep into his bones. Lying in the wilderness, Yao Wenyu broke down and cried inconsolably. For his teacher, and for himself. He had refused to see anyone when he was in Dancheng, merely lying on that bed, shrouded in dimness from dawn till dusk. The pain was in his legs, but his self-worth was the thing that had shattered. He was forced to acknowledge that he could no longer take care of himself. His carefree spirit had turned to smoke and ash, scattered in the wind. This realization haunted his dreams each night he slept, and dogged his days each morning he woke. He was broken through and through, yet he still wanted to live. Chapter 159. Nameless. Something had gone awry with Yao Yu's medicine. Though the physicians from the Pan Manor couldn't figure out what was wrong, whatever it was could no doubt be laid at the feet of Pan Yuan. After all, he had been the one tasked with looking after Yao Yu. The commandery princess attempted to track down the Longyou merchant who had paid off Pan Yuan's debts, but the man had disappeared without a trace. And not long after Yao Yu left, Pan Yuan fell off his horse and died. With this, the trail leading to whoever had instigated him to poison Yao Yu went cold. Still, Pan Ling was certain Xueshu Zhuo was behind it. Their relationship in Chudu continued to deteriorate. Gao Zhongxiong sensed the creeping tension in the room. He too had been on friendly terms with Pan Yuan, and he felt as though he was sitting on pins and needles, waiting for Yao Yu to blame him by association. When the silence became too much for him to bear, he blurted, "I was acquainted with Pan Yuan, but we don't share the same ideals. Any conversation we had over wine was merely a polite formality." He was unskilled at flattery and stumbled over his words. "On the contrary, I greatly admire Yuanzhuo's talent. Perhaps you remember that gathering in Chaodong Tavern during the reign of Xiandu. Yuanzhuo's talent and bearing were dazzling then, truly a sight to behold." Yao Yu waited for Gao Zhongxiong to trail off before calmly replying, "The past is but a dream. We needn't mention it here. It's fate that I've encountered you again in Suzhou. I found a good master here, but I ask what plans you have for the future." Gao Zhongxiong stole a glance at Shan Zichuan. "What plans could I have? Look at me." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "I've been reduced to a laughingstock. I persevered in my studies for so many years, but in the end, it's all come to nothing." Beneath his sleeves, Shan Zichuan's fingers tightened around his folding fan. The room felt chilly. It was time to get someone to prepare a hand warmer. He pulled his wandering mind back to the present, his jade earrings swaying slightly as he spoke politely to Gao Zhongxiong. "The political climate is unstable, and great men across the land are stepping out from the crowd to make a name for themselves. Since Mr. Shen Wei has come so far to Zizhou, why not reside in my manor for now and take your time to decide?" Gao Zhongxiong couldn't help but feel greatly touched to hear Shan Zichuan address him as Mr. Shen Wei. He'd been through untold hardship on his journey, and the masters he had encountered and served had not been good ones. He stood and bowed deeply to Shan Zichuan, his expressions of thanks even more awkward and inarticulate than his praise of Yao Yu had been. Shan Zichuan spoke a few more comforting words, and Gao Zhongxiong finally withdrew almost an hour later. Yao Yu watched the bamboo blinds falling back into place. He waited until Gao Zhongxiong was out of earshot before asking, "Can the vice commander see no use for this man?" Even if Shan Zichuan truly thought so, he couldn't say it outright. "For you to have given him such a strong recommendation, there must be something extraordinary about him." "I think so," Yao Yu said. "Gao Zhongxiong's courtesy name is Shen Wei, divinely powerful. In the Imperial College, he was known as the Sharpened Pen. Back then, when Shi Hongxuan was stirring up unrest in Chudu by inciting the Imperial College, he chose Gao Zhongxiong precisely because of his eloquence. Gao Zhongxiong entered the capital as a student in the 4th year of Xiandu. It was just after the fall of Zhongbo, when the 6 prefectures had become a scene of devastation. The lamentation of Cha Shi, he wrote under the influence of wine, sent the students falling over themselves to transcribe private copies for distribution. When the essay made its way into Sun Yu's hands, he was so moved to shed tears by candlelight." Shan Zichuan sipped his tea. "I see." The students' demonstration back then, facilitated by Shi Hongxuan, had in fact been instigated by Shan Zichuan himself. When Gao Zhongxiong had led the Imperial College in demanding answers for Shan Zichuan's release from the Temple of Guilt, it had been Pan Zhugui and Jade who arrived to quell the disturbance. The students had redirected their anger at these two, turning the entire farce into a dispute between the Imperial College and Pan Zhugui's faction. Jile and the rest had been caught off guard and subsequently lost the opportunity to land a decisive blow on Shan Zichuan as he entered the embroidered uniform guard. No one knew better than Shan Zichuan how that fiasco had begun. It was the same for the Imperial College riots Xueshu Zhuo had later instigated. Both he and Shan Zichuan had deliberately manipulated public sentiment before herding the students into a desired direction. To accomplish such a feat, compelling rhetoric, words that had the power to move men, was indispensable. Yao Wenyu's meaning was clear. Gao Zhongxiong possessed such a power. His writing could sway hearts and minds, and a talent like this was exactly what Shan Zichuan now needed. Your trip to Chazhou made the vice commander a household name in Zhongbo, but as long as you bear the stain of Shen Wei's name, you will be unable to lead the people openly or convince others to follow you. Yao Wenyu paused. Even if the full story of what happened in Zhongbo is made public, Shen Wei will likely never be absolved of blame. A tarnished reputation stole weight from one's words. This was a problem Shan Zichuan could not circumvent. When the self-crowned King Yi of Fanzhou was drafting up letters and pamphlets to vilify Zhezhou, he had made reference to Zhongbo's fall numerous times. Shen Wei's cowardice was a fact. There was no way to refute it, even if Zhou Gui wanted to. Shan Zichuan was Shen Wei's 8th son of common birth. They were related by blood, and whether or not he had been an unfavored child did nothing to diminish public anger. Unlike Fei Shang, who had merely a distant common birth connection to the Fei clan, Shan Zichuan's ties to the Shen clan were undeniable, and a glib tongue wouldn't convince anyone otherwise. Moreover, although they now knew that the true cause of the tragedy in Zhongbo had been Hua Siqian and his faction's attempt to fill the void in the state treasury, all the evidence had been destroyed. Shen Wei had self-immolated. Hua Siqian had died in prison, and Wei Huaigu had swallowed poison, taking their secrets with him. There was not a single trace left to find of their collusion with the Biansha horsemen to sell Great Zhou's defensive maps. This was the dark cloud looming over Shan Zichuan's head. It was also his greatest stumbling block. How was it that he had risen so swiftly to power in Zhezhou, yet faced such a scarcity of capable subordinates? The talents of the land refused to approach him. They'd rather follow heroes like Kong Yi, who had risen in rebellion from among the common folk, than throw in their lot with a traitor's son. The vice commander executed one of Zhezhou's advisors today. Only by holding the trial publicly did you prevent your name from falling further into infamy. You've overseen the rise of Zhezhou and the alliance with Chazhou, but if the vice commander wishes to advance a step further, you must drop the title of vice commander. Noting that Shan Zichuan's expression remained unchanged as he toyed with his folding fan, Yao Wenyu knew he had already considered this. He continued, Zhezhou has long freed itself from Chudu's control. Using your old title makes it too easy to mistake who is the master and who the subordinates. Maintaining the address is no longer apt. By this point, the two had reached a tacit understanding. Shan Zichuan could be addressed as vice commander or even judge. Those were his titles in the embroidered uniform guard. But both had been rendered void the instant he left Chudu. He was now in Zhezhou, and the prefect of Zhezhou was Zhou Gui. Without a new title of his own, he would always be the guest, and Zhou Gui the host and master. The offending advisors could remain securely in place on the other side of the partition, despite what had happened at the prefectural yamen, because they still treated Zhou Gui as the administrator of Zhezhou. They didn't see themselves as subordinates to Shan Zichuan. This was still a line marking him an outsider. Only Kong Ling had recognized the problem long ago. He had brought this very thing to Zhou Gui's attention before he set off for Chazhou, and had reminded Zhou Gui again before he left for Huaizhou. But Zhou Gui truly wasn't well acquainted with this kind of political maneuvering, and thus had been slow to react. Shan Zichuan couldn't proclaim himself king, at least, not yet. King Yi of Fanzhou had helpfully established himself first. Now, he became the prey standing right under Qidong's nose. Qi Juyin had had enough time to catch her breath and return to the board. Once she dealt with the Bianzhouan commandery, she would at last have the wherewithal to deploy troops to Zhongbo, and the first adversary she would confront would be these self-proclaimed commoner kings. There are benefits to being nameless nobodies. Shan Zichuan leaned back slightly. At least Tang Jiu Qing has no justifiable reason to skirt the other 5 prefectures and come after Zhou. Zhou had no bandits or self-styled kings. The 8 great battalions were pursuing Xiao Chiye, who commanded the imperial army. At most, Shen Zichuan was a fugitive, and Zhou could be accused of harboring him. Zhou Gui hadn't openly run up the rebel flag. He was still technically the prefect in this territory. If he turned a deaf ear to Chudu's orders, it could be explained away by the vast distance between Zhou and the capital. On these grounds alone, Tang Jiu Qing would not directly attack Zhou. Conceivably, she could route her troops to the western side of Zhou and claim she was suppressing bandits, then enter with the excuse of passing through to the other prefectures. But deploying her troops this way would be expensive, and it was unlikely Chudu could spare the money. The best option had been for the 8 great battalions to deploy their own troops. They were garrisoned closer to Zhou and could be supplied by Dancheng. If they used the excuse of tracking down the fugitive Shen Zichuan, they could easily instigate a war with Zhou. But Han Jin had been too impatient. Xiao Chiye had routed his troops and beaten Han Jin silly. The 8 great battalions had cowered back. But such a delicate balance couldn't be maintained for long. The 8 great battalions were bound to rally for another attempt. Once the 3 factions in Chudu stabilized under a new emperor, the Ministry of War would appoint a new chief commander. Xiao Chiye and Shen Zichuan had accepted the Beiyuan hunting grounds from Zhou Gui in order to guard against this very situation. Once they took up residence, the imperial army, with its 20,000 men, would become a shield defending the western edge of Zhou, purposely positioned to resist the 8 great battalions. Yet at the same time, the moment the imperial army re-entered Zhou's territory, Tang Jiu Qing could justifiably march north and attack Zhou to eliminate the rebel forces. Thus, Shen Zichuan was in no hurry to get rid of Kong Yi of Fanzhou. He was happy to let this man be the mountain between him and Qidong. Yet he couldn't allow Kong Yi to expand his territory unchecked either. Before, I advised the vice commander to take Fanzhou down swiftly, but the timing is no longer right. The tea in Yao Wenyu's cup had cooled. If the vice commander wants to keep Kong Yi in play, you must hack off the hand he is extending north. A few moments ago, Shen Zichuan said, his eyes sharp, Ci'an sent Lei Jingzhe back to Mount Luo with his reputation in tatters. Ever since he lost control of the bandits, it's been chaos on Mount Luo as the various factions turn against one another. If Kong Yi wishes to form an alliance with Mount Luo, Lei Jingzhe, who badly wants to return to power, certainly won't miss the opportunity. Something stirred in Yao Wenyu's eyes. The vice commander means to... Shen Zichuan snapped open his folding fan and partially covered his face. With a smile in his eyes, he said, I'd like to lend him a helping hand. The wind had picked up outside the window. It seemed it was about to rain again. Han Jin had gouged at the walls until his fingers were scraped bloody. He had been in the Zhou prison close to 3 months, so emaciated he was barely recognizable. Even worse, he endured a constant stream of verbal abuse and insults from guards and fellow prisoners. At first he couldn't take it and wept day in and day out, but as time passed, he gradually grew numb. Mealtime. Bucket in hand, the prisoner guard rapped on the cell doors one at a time with a wooden spoon and hollered, It's mealtime. The guard was adept at this duty and swiftly dished out the broth and rice, filling the bowls to the brim without losing a drop. Upon hearing his voice, Han Jin hurried over to the cell door and reached for the bowl. But before his finger so much as brushed it, another jailer passing by behind kicked the bowl over, spilling the contents over the ground. Han Jin was so hungry his stomach ached. He dropped to his knees and pinched at the rice on the ground with his fingers, desperately shoving it into his mouth. Grains of sand and dirt clung to the rice, and even a few tiny rocks, which made his teeth ache as he ground down on them. He pressed his head against the bars and reached into his mouth with the dirty hand to extract the stones. As he did, he saw a pair of legs stop outside the door. Han Jin cautiously glanced up through the bars. Zhongxiong, who had only meant to come peek at his former master, had never expected to find Han Jin reduced to such a state. Han Jin was Han Cheng's younger brother, known as a free-spirited young master in Chudu. He had succeeded Xi Guan as the military commissioner of the 8th Grade Battalions and had even waded into the waters himself during the incident with the public ditches. At that time, he had respected Xiao Chuye greatly. Gao Zhongxiong felt a lump in his throat. Several times, he made to speak, but words failed him. Han Jin looked blankly at Gao Zhongxiong, then pressed his face to the bars and asked tearfully, "Is my elder brother here? Tell me, has my brother come?" Chapter 160. Hearsay. Shocked, Gao Zhongxiong stepped backward until he bumped into the bars behind him. Han Jin couldn't even stand mosquito bites during military campaigns. How could he endure the dirty conditions of a prison? Scrambling on the ground for scraps like this went against his very nature. When he saw Gao Zhongxiong's expression, he burst out wailing, "You treacherous man! I'm in this state because of you!" Not daring to respond, Gao Zhongxiong stuck close to the opposite bars as he headed for the exit. Consumed with hatred, Han Jin launched into a torrent of curses. "You threw in your lot with that traitor Shun! Fucking shameless! A disloyal, turncoat slave who panders to a traitor! Gao Zhongxiong, you're on your own now. Don't you dare run! Come back, you!" Gao Zhongxiong cut a sorry figure indeed as he pushed the prison door open and fled that relentless, haunting voice. Outside, the chilly wind gnawed at his back. All scholars cherished their reputations. Who didn't wish to go down in history as an honorable man of letters unsullied by politics? The words disloyal, turncoat slave had dealt him such a heavy blow he swayed on his feet. Tens of thousands of grievances crowded in his heart. With nowhere to vent, they congealed into a surge of nausea so overwhelming he grabbed at the wall and threw up. He vomited everything he had consumed that day, heaving until only acid was left. He leaned against the wall, gradually sliding to the ground. As he tipped his head up toward the vast sky, he thought of his family back in Yuzhou. He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, but the tears streaming down his cheeks wouldn't stop. He wiped them with his sleeve instead. Gao Zhongxiong wrapped his arms around himself, curled up in a corner, and sobbed silently. What sort of person would be willing to give up his dignity and bow to power for a pittance? Not Gao Zhongxiong, but without this pittance, he would die. To find a way out for himself, he had cast aside the very last of his pride. Had anyone told him 5 years ago that he would bow obsequiously to Yamen staff and beg for a clerical position in a small prefectural administration, he would have said he'd rather die. But now, he'd done more than that. He had learned how to flatter others for the smallest of rewards. Sometime later, Gao Zhongxiong got up, tidied himself, and edged along the wall as he made his way out onto the streets. As he approached the Yamen, he had the sense that the whispers he heard were directed at him, but he didn't feel a thing. It was just as Yao Wenyu had said. The past was a dream. He, too, had woken up. "This one is Gao Zhongxiong, and by humble courtesy name is Shen Wei." Gao Zhongxiong strode into the Yamen and bowed. "It is on the personal recommendation of the vice commander that I've come to offer my writing skills for the Yamen's use. In the future, I shall be responsible for drafting up all the official proclamations and public notices required by the Yamen." The end of the 8th month came in a blink. Kong Ling and Yu Xiaocai returned from their trip to Huaizhou. The negotiations had gone smoothly, but one thing had stood out as odd. The attitude of the Luoxia Pass commander had been most peculiar when they crossed Luoxia on the way back, far more cordial than the first time they passed through on their way to Huaizhou. "That commandment from Luoxia Pass was digging for information on our vice commander," Yu Xiaozai explained. "He made several inquiries regarding the vice commander's marriage. He couldn't be trying to play matchmaker for the vice commander, could he?" Thinking of Xiao Chuye, Zhou Gui blurted, "How did you answer?" "At first I wanted to say the vice commander was spoken for." Yu Xiaocai had grown much tanner on this trip, but Cheng Feng advised me not to, so I simply said he was still unmarried. Perhaps Zhou Gui and Yu Xiaocai didn't understand, but Kong Ling was a discerning man. He had heard that the heir consort of Li Bei had visited Suzhou and had paid special attention to Luo Xia Pass's attitude on their return journey. He had a good idea of the reason for the change. No doubt Li Bei had reached out to the commandant in advance. The only thing he didn't know was whether it was the prince or the heir seeking information on Shen Zichuan. Kong Ling picked up his teacup. The vice commander isn't married. It's better to state things as they are. Anything else provides fodder for gossip and may lead to misunderstandings. Zhou Gui was about to bring up all that had happened with the screening of the clerks when Xiao Tianya lifted the curtain. The men rose in unison. Vice Commander. It was raining today. What a shocker. Sorry. It was raining today, and Shen Zichuan had walked the whole way over from his manor. Even with an umbrella, it was inevitable he would get wet. In contrast, Yao Wenyu was bundled securely in a cloak as he was pushed in. Yet the layers didn't conceal his unnatural thinness. Even in the wheelchair, he seemed insubstantial. Bringing up the rear was Gao Zhongxiong, dressed simply, with a pile of books in his arms and his shoulders partially wet. Gentlemen, please take a seat. Shen Zichuan settled into his chair and dried his hands with his handkerchief. The long journey must have been hard on Mr. Changfeng and Yo Jiang. There's no hurry to return to duty soon. You must take a few days' break. Kong Ling and Yu Xiaocai both gave their thanks. Shenwei, do sit. There's no need for these formalities. Shen Zichuan waved Gao Zhongxiong toward a chair and said to Kong Ling, This is Shenwei, a new subordinate of mine who specializes in composition. He's presently gaining experience in the Yamen, but there are plenty of matters on which he will need Mr. Changfeng's guidance. Kong Ling humbly turned the compliment aside and looked Gao Zhongxiong over. The erstwhile student had his hair up in a simple top knot today. As he spent all day moving about the Yamen, efficiency had taken precedence over style, and he no longer looked so much like a scholar. Gao Zhongxiong set down the books in his arms and bowed to Kong Ling in greeting. What a great honor. Mr. Changfeng's reputation precedes him. Kong Ling rose and returned the greeting. Shen Zichuan waited until they were settled in their seats before speaking again. Things are going smoothly in both Huaizhou and Chazhou. Everyone can look forward to a good year. The new clerks have been sent off to survey the fields. To ensure the accuracy of their measurements, their first survey will be followed by 2 more checks. This work will likely take until the end of the year, but we should finish the survey before the snow. The household registration is complete as well, and Suzhou's autumn harvest has been transferred into the granaries. Once snow falls, we should begin discussing the allocation of farmlands. Yao Wenyu took this as his cue to speak. In the past, the land taxes and levies in Chudu were all paid in kind. After the grain was collected and put into storage, its value was carefully calculated. The labor cost of the transport office to take the grain to Chudu also had to be accounted for, so the values might not necessarily be accurate. Here in Suzhou, we can dispense with the escort and transportation of grain. However, to account for the increased expenses for upkeep of the granaries, the easiest way would be to combine the miscellaneous taxes and collect all amounts in standard taels of silver. The trade of grain is not a long-term endeavor either, Kong Ling said. Once Chazhou gets back on its feet, the people there should be able to begin tilling their lands by the start of next spring. If they can sow all their fields, they may have a bumper harvest. At that point, they will no longer need to buy grain from us. What about the other 4 prefectures? Yu Xiaocai was still less familiar with Zhongbo than the rest. I can't imagine King Yi will be in the running for long. Fanzhou and Dengzhou are so poor, the people there were eating each other, yet he's busy bestowing awards and conferring titles on the motley crew that passes for ministers in his court. If Chazhou no longer needs us, we can do business with them. The others laughed. Yojing truly hails from the Chief Surveillance Bureau, Shen Zichuan said. Seeing Yu Xiaocai's puzzled look, Kong Ling took pity on him. When you see others conducting themselves dishonorably, you think first of impeachment. But remember, if they're so impoverished they're eating one another, how would they have the money to buy our grain? Human trafficking is rampant in Fanzhou. Zhou Gui commented. If we try to sell them grain, they might bring children for barter. These people are incorrigible. The mere mention of this subject filled him with contempt. The traffickers are indeed a problem, Yao Wenyu said, but the root of it lies with Mount Luo. As for King Yi, he must live at all costs. He relaxed slightly and revealed a smile. He is our bulwark in the south. Without him, we'll come face to face with Qi Yin. Speaking of the Grand Marshal, Yu Xiaocai rolled up his cuffs. That reminds me. I heard some news. During the wedding ceremony for Qi Shiyu and Third Lady Hua, the old marshal was apparently so dazzled by his bride's beauty during the ceremony that he collapsed on the spot. That's not funny. Zhou Gui was stunned. He collapsed? He had a stroke, Yu Xiaocai exclaimed. Whether Qi Shuyu's stroke was genuine or not, he clearly wouldn't be sharing a bed with Hua Xiangyi anytime soon. The Empress Dowager had managed to become in-laws with Qidong, but that was the limit to her power. If Hua Xiangyi didn't beget a male heir, Qi Yin would retain her position as Grand Marshal. With her new stepmother in her hands, Qi Yin had a legitimate reason to hold her brothers in check. Man proposes, heaven disposes, Zhou Gui lamented. How fortunate Qi Yin is not a man. They laughed and moved on to other topics. Kong Ling and Yu Xiaocai had just returned that day. Shen Zichuan couldn't in good conscience let them sit and chat the entire night. He dismissed them soon after midnight. Zhou Gui personally saw Kong Ling back to his courtyard and gave him a concise account of the clerk screening incident on the way. He executed the advisor who took bribes. Since then, the Yamen has been peaceful, but some new rumors have been popping up recently. They're saying the vice commander came to Cizhou to coerce me. Can you believe it? Heaven knows I can't eat or sleep well these days. I worry such words will make their way to the vice commander's ears and create a rift between us. Kong Ling held the umbrella steady over their heads. I advised you long ago to dispense with the title of prefect. If this had been played out before someone more paranoid, we would have already lost the vice commander's trust. But, Zhou Gui fretted, I don't know what to change it to. It doesn't matter what you change it to. What's important is your attitude. Kong Ling tilted the umbrella to allow Zhou Gui to raise the lantern. Cizhou has already established itself as a regional power. The matter of its leadership can no longer be left ambiguous. You may not intend it, but rumors only grow. You must draw a clear line between master and subordinate, as soon as possible, and make it plain to all and sundry that Cizhou has changed hands. As they conversed, the two men climbed the steps to Kong Ling's residence. Their attendants trailed behind them. Before Kong Ling stepped onto the walkway, he turned and motioned for them to keep their distance. It's not appropriate to call him the Provincial Administration Commissioner, nor to call him the Supreme Commander. Think of a title for me, Zhou Gui said, following him impatiently, and I'll have it done tomorrow morning. Those are all titles bestowed by Chudu. Of course they're not appropriate. Kong Ling couldn't think of one on the spot either. He stood for a moment, struggling to think, then finally said, Shun Wei was Prince of Jianxing, but he was stripped of his noble rank and title. We can't allow any association between him and the vice commander. They stood side by side in the chill night air, letting the wind rustle their clothes. Both shivered simultaneously. Tired and cold, Kong Ling shooed Zhou Gui off, saying, Go back and think of a title yourself. 2 days later, Zhou Gui submitted a document with the request to change Shen Zichuan's title of vice commander to prefectural governor. He'd initially meant to address him simply as Shunjuan or Governor Shun, but the name Shun was associated too closely with Shun Wei, and thus he chose to add a more neutral prefectural. Footnote number 1, Jun, is an address meaning Lord. In any case, adding prefectural made the title more flexible. It could be revised in the future if any change needed to be made. His proposal marked the first time Cizhou explicitly recognized Shen Zichuan as the de facto leader of the prefecture. Meanwhile, Zhou Gui demoted himself from his original position of prefect and became Shen Zichuan's subordinate. When the change was made public, Kong Yi of Fanzhou was first to become anxious upon hearing the news. He issued several notices in succession, angrily denouncing Zhou Gui for bending the knee to the traitor's son. But Suzhou now had Gao Zhongxiong, an eloquent writer of quick wit, who could convince anyone that black was white. Gao Zhongxiong wrote pamphlet upon pamphlet, condemning King Yi for his heartless disregard for the lives of commoners in Fanzhou and prioritizing the wasteful construction of extravagant buildings for his own enjoyment. At the same time, he also composed a ballad for distribution to Zhongbo's 4 eastern prefectures. It told the story of how Shen Zichuan had suffered and been injured while transferring thousands of li to deliver life-saving grain to Chazhou. So touching was this tale that it moved all who heard it to tears. The further the story spread, the more exaggerated it became. By the time the ballad reached Xiao Fengshu's ears, Shen Zichuan had apparently sustained grave wounds and had nearly lost an arm amid his valiant struggle. Shocked, Xiao Fengshu ran out of his tent and shook Xiao Chuye awake in the middle of the night, exclaiming, "He lost an arm?" Xiao Chuye, who had been diligently running mission after mission for half a month without rest, had only just drifted off when his old man yanked him up. He was still half asleep, so Xiao Fengshu shook him and asked the question again. Annoyed at the jostling, Xiao Chuye asked hoarsely, "Who lost an arm?" "Shen Zichuan." Chapter 161. Sunset Glow. It was as though he had been doused with a bucket of icy water. Xiao Chuye wasn't just awake. His hair was standing on end. He sat up and stared at Xiao Fengshu, yet his mind was completely blank, as if he'd been punched so hard even the insides of his chest had turned to mush. He shoved Xiao Fengshu aside and tumbled off the cot to pull on his boots, but crashed against the corner of the table so hard he almost couldn't get up. And his damn boots were nowhere to be found. Chunyang and Gujin, keeping watch outside the tent, heard the flap being lifted. Out stumbled Xiao Chuye, resembling a wandering ghost with one boot on and one foot bare. He didn't even have his outer robe as he rushed to untie Snowcrest's reins. Gujin was quickest to react. He rushed forward to grab the reins and called, "Master." Chunyang followed just behind, intending to head inside to look for the robe and boots. Xiao Fengshu stepped out, bewildered. "You didn't know? Didn't this happen a long time ago, when he went to Chazhou?" Observing Xiao Fengshu's expression, realization dawned on Chunyang. He slapped his forehead and turned around, shouting, "Chazhou! Master, it was from Chazhou! Gongzi is fine!" The strident shouts shocked Xiao Chuye's drifting soul back into his body. He turned and made a beeline for Xiao Fengshu, so anxious his eyes had gone red. When he was a few paces away, he spun around on the spot once before finally wiping his face as he exclaimed, "Good grief, my own damn father." The scabs on Shen Zichuan's palm had fallen off, leaving only a scar behind. After the 8th month passed, the rain in Suzhou ceased, the frost came heavier, and the weather grew colder. Yao Wenyu, having caught a small chill in recent days, remained indoors with a hand warmer and rarely ventured outside. Fei Sheng continued to follow Shen Zichuan around, while Li Xiong followed Ding Tao and hardly ever mentioned Lei Jingjia. "Is Han Jing still in prison?" Shen Zichuan had finished his medicine. He was gazing out the window and questioned Fei Sheng almost idly. "He is," Fei Sheng confirmed. "Master is benevolent to have spared his life, yet he continues to wail all day without so much as a word of repentance." Shen Zichuan turned the porcelain bowl in his hand and studied the pattern. "Well, he is Han Cheng's younger brother." Fei Sheng lowered his eyes and unconsciously shivered. Han Cheng had killed Ti Huilian right in the middle of the street. Based on everything he deciphered about Shen Zichuan's temper, Fei Sheng had to assume Shen Zichuan was keeping Han Jin alive not to exert leverage over Chudu, but for some greater purpose. What this was, Fei Sheng didn't dare guess and had no wish to know. As a personal guard, he was merely Shen Zichuan's dagger. Shen Zichuan's wish was his command. Shen Zichuan raised his eyes, looking out the window at the cold rays of sunlight spilling over the ground and leaving tear-stained trails through the frost. He flashed an enigmatic smile. Release him. Fei Sheng murmured acknowledgement. Give him a bath and a change of clothes, then feed him and offer him a soft bed. Shen Zichuan added. He doesn't need to do anything. Let him play to his heart's content. Fei Sheng didn't dare object and merely nodded before taking his leave. The moment he left, Qiao Tianya lifted the curtain and entered. A letter from Li Bei. Qiao Tianya set the envelope on Shen Zichuan's desk. Send post haste. It must be an important message from Master. Is Yuan Zhuo doing any better? Shen Zichuan asked as he opened the letter. Before Qiao Tianya could reply, he saw Shen Zichuan's stunned expression. He appeared to read the letter several times. It's about the winter trade market. Shen Zichuan paused. I have to go to the front lines in person to speak with the Prince of Li Bei. The weather in Li Bei was capricious. Bright, clear days were scarce in autumn, but the instant the sun did appear, it would become so hot one itched to strip off their clothes. Xiao Chuye had returned to the front lines again at the end of the 8th month, and he remained there for the time being. After his defeat, he hadn't rested for a moment. Whether it was heading north to transport military supplies or riding west to contact the homeland, he'd personally led his men on every trip. Xiao Fengshu's castigation seemed to have sanded down all his rough edges, to the point that he was now willingly serving as a minor supplies general. When Chun Yang went to fetch water, he saw Xiao Chuye standing amid the withered yellow grass, breaking a horse, or rather, he was meant to be breaking it, but in reality, Xiao Chuye was being far gentler than usual with this animal. Snow white with a patch of black on its chest. It was the horse Lu Yizhi had set aside for Xiao Chuye's wife. For the past month, Xiao Chuye had brought the horse with him everywhere while carrying out his assignments. He wanted to train it himself. Xiao Fengshu came riding over from the opposite direction, and Meng swooped down through the wind and brushed past Xiao Fengshu, ruffling his hair. He then took off again, gliding along the tips of the grass before soaring into the air, where he wheeled once before flying away. Xiao Fengshu dismounted and threw his reins to the deputy general behind him. He took off his helmet, spat out the grit in his mouth, and narrowed his eyes as he watched Xiao Chuye. After a moment, he removed his heavy armor and took the saddle off his horse. He then flipped back atop it, riding bareback, and beckoned Xiao Chuye over. Zuo Qianqiu leaned over the paddock railing, his white hair fluttering in the wind as he watched father and son challenging each other. Wu Ziyu ran over and leapt up to straddle the railing. Behind him, the men of the Li Bei armored cavalry and imperial army crowded around, packed like sardines along the rails. Tang Taihu was so squashed he couldn't even free his hands. He craned his neck and hollered, "What's this about?" Wu Ziyu waved the steamed bun he was eating and shouted hoarsely over the din, "If Argongza wins today, the supply squadron will be treated like lords this month. They'll have to give us 2 more scoops for our meals." Zuo Qianqiu laughed at this back and forth. "It'll be a few more years before Aya can defeat his old man." "Argongza won't let us down," Tang Taihu cried, wiping at the sweat that had trickled down his cheek. His face shone dark and flushed in the scorching heat. "What if the prince wins?" Zuo Qianqiu asked. Chun Yang was about to answer when Tang Taihu shouted over him, "Then we'll run along the grassland and bark." Wu Ziyu and Gu Jing leapt forward to clap their hands over his mouth, but Zuo Qianqiu didn't let the opportunity slip. "Fine. Aya, you hear that? If you lose to your father today, your whole squad will have to bark for us." Xiao Chuye lifted his fingers and whistled, and Snowcrest trotted to his side. He mounted his horse and asked Xiao Fengshu, "Where to?" Seeming to think for a moment, Xiao Fengshu repeated, "Where to?" But before the words had fully left his mouth, he had set his heels to his horse's side and shot off into the distance. The imperial army booed. Tang Taihu struggled to free his mouth and exclaimed, "His lordship cheated!" Snowcrest sprang forward like a black arrow leaving the bowstring, kicking up a gust in its wake. The sun in that clear sky was blinding on the horizon, and the backs of father and son as they galloped away were almost identical. Meng broke through the clouds and chased after them, sticking close to Xiao Chiye as he looked down upon that pair of dark arrows, one in front and one behind. Blades of grass went flying under the horse's hooves, while the wind stirred the endless expanse of the plain, bending the stalks with its passage. They rode through the undulating grass like a pair of stars, one large and one small, falling into the waves of the ocean, leaving a long trail in their wake as they cut through the grasslands. Xiao Chiye gazed at Xiao Fengshu's back, the wind rustling in his ears. Xiao Fengshu hadn't grown old. How could he? He looked so strong and robust, no different than he had 20 years ago when he would lift one son in each arm, his laughter booming over the grasslands as he tossed them until they cried. Gradually, Xiao Chiye caught up to him. Snowcrest was sturdier and younger than the horse beneath Xiao Fengshu. It charged forth with vigor, eyes focused only on what lay ahead, as if nothing could stop it. Slowly, the two came neck and neck, both horses running until they were lathered. The sun blazed overhead, searing the backs of both horses and riders. Perhaps it would be the last day of scorching sun in Libei this year. The stone monument marked the finishing point, engraved with the names of the Libei armored cavalry who had died in battle the previous year, along with the falcons fallen with them and the battle steeds that had carried them. At the very last moment, just as their horses' hooves stretched out toward the shadow of the marker, Meng beat them to it and darted across the finish line. He circled once before landing on the monument, claiming first place. The falcon is mine. Xiao Chiye slowed down, so I win. The land is mine. Xiao Fengshu wheeled the horse around and pointed at his feet. I was here 800 years earlier than you. Xiao Chiye coolly ignored this statement. They dismounted. The sun was making its downward descent in the west. Xiao Fengshu climbed the low stone steps and stood before the monument. They reached out to wipe away the dust. The wind was strong here. It tousled the hair at his temples, revealing streaks of white. Herein lie my brothers. Xiao Chiye came up and stood beside him. 10 years ago, I brought your brother here. Xiao Fengshu pointed to a spot on the stone. There was a boy here with a rather unique name of Sui Ning. He was the same age as your brother. Old names on the monument were scraped off every year and replaced with new ones. The act signified that generation after generation of the Libei armored cavalry had existed here, and that generation after generation had vanished here. With its back to the Hongyan Mountains, the stone monument lay in eternal rest. The souls it memorialized were the Hongyan Mountains wind and the Hongyan Mountains stars. I want to be right here. Xiao Chiye pointed to the center. It's a spacious spot. The location is good, and you can see far into the distance. That's my spot, Xiao Fengshu said pettily. I want all the spots here. What about my mother? Xiao Chiye turned his head to scrutinize Xiao Fengshu. You'll be leaving her alone in the homeland. Xiao Fengshu didn't respond. He gazed past the monument toward the Hongyan Mountains. Then, as if dazzled by the setting sun, he turned away, back toward the Libei homeland. He could barely open his eyes for the wind. We can look at each other from afar, eyes to eyes, forevermore. Xiao Chiye followed his gaze. It is here we are born, and here we will die. The people of Libei lie in the mountains and rivers with their faces tipped to the blazing sun. It doesn't matter if they're men or women. The iron bones in the sunlight belong to unyielding heroes. Xiao Fengshu opened his palm, and the wind brushed his skin so gently it felt like the silky black hair of his wife. It was the only indulgence he had allowed himself in the past decades. One day, I will return to her embrace. Sir, don't say that. Xiao Chiye looked at the waves of billowing grass. There seemed to be no end to that yellow sea. The sorrow of parting and the joy of reunion that belonged to every person alive was merely a fleeting moment in the timeliness of the universe. In the blink of an eye, they, too, would disintegrate. From then on, all would be silent. Every trace of the time they'd shared gone. How precious was an encounter between two people. Xiao Fangxu turned and punched Xiao Qiuye on the shoulder, then pulled his son into a tight hug. But he let go quickly and said, "If you want to surpass me, you still need a few years." Who knows? Xiao Qiuye patted his own chest and straightened to his full height. Xiao Fangxu took a few steps and bent as if to pick something off the ground. Being pelted with horse dung had left Xiao Qiuye with lasting trauma. He promptly turned tail and ran. Xiao Fangxu burst out laughing. The wind was still blowing as father and son made their way back, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. Daylight lingered on the horizon as they returned the horses to the paddock. Drenched in sweat, Xiao Qiuye stripped off his upper garments and went down to the river to bathe. The surface of the water glimmered in the dying light. As he raised the wooden bucket to pour water over himself, ripples of gold danced over the muscles on his back. Xiao Qiuye bent and rinsed his dented arm guard in the river. The iron had warped to the point it was no longer usable, but he hadn't changed it out. When he took it out of the water, he untied the frayed dog hide cord and turned. "Hand me the—" A travel-worn Shantatran stood at the top of the riverbank, the sunset glow spilling over the hems of his robe, still covered with bits of grass. Xiao Qiuye had missed him so much, and now he stood here before Xiao Qiuye, in the moment before the last rays of the setting sun slipped below the edge of the world. Alrighty, everyone. That concludes the reading of chapters, 156 through 161, which was more than I intended by 2 whole chapters. But I feel like now is a good stopping point. So let's go ahead and just review this material, shall we? So going all the way back, we have Xiao Jiming's wife and Lu Guangbai's sister, Lu Yizhi, coming through Suzhou to see Lanzhou. This is like her mission part 2, right? Adding on to her main mission. But anyway, she is basically an acting mother to Xiao Qiuye since his mother and, his and Xiao Jiming's mother is gone. So anyway, she can't be a mother to Jiming because, well, she's wifey to him. But anyway, so yeah, I thought it was hilarious when at first she mistook Zhou Gui as Lanzhou, and I was like, ma'am, you got it all wrong. But eventually, really quickly, that was cleared up. It was just really, really funny. And so then we have Qi Juyin basically asking, first, she's basically protecting Lu Pingyan while she's doing her investigation on everything that happened with Lu Guangbai, the assisting eunuch, the moldy rice, all that jazz. And then, she eventually asks Li Bei to take him, and the capital suspects that Lu Guangbai will be defecting to the Biansha tribesmen, which I hope that is not the case. But if that is the case, I understand, but at the same time, no. Only for the simple fact that, him going to defect to the Biansha horsemen before going to Li Bei, before, going to... Well, I guess I understand as far as going to Qi Juyin. But at least before going to Li Bei, I'm just kind of like, no, that's not what we do. Your sister's there. You can't. Okay. Anyway, I still just want to know where he is. Where has he gone? Come back, please. Anyway, Qi Juyin is basically in this standpoint of no matter what the nobles are sending her, what memorials are being presented and stuff from the Empress Dowager or anyone, she's like, I'm not listening to anyone except for the emperor. Y'all are trying to get me to hand over Lu Pingyan, and it's not happening. I'm going to hold on to him and hopefully, yes, also send him to Li Bei, which that is part of Yizhi's mission. But I like that she's not immediately just handing him over and everything and really truly wanting to investigate what has been happening. And so I just thought it was funny that Lu Yizhi, she clearly knows what she's doing, was picking at Ding Tao to get him to speak. Because clearly Qiao Tianya had told him, not to say too much. But immediately, based on her verbiage of things, she was able to weasel information out of him very quickly. No surprise, he's a youngin', so. And then when it came to finally giving gifts to Shan Zichuan, I actually thought it was funny that she put the expensive stuff on the bottom so he could not see. And I know that was done intentionally, but I'm wondering if it was done intentionally because maybe she felt if he saw the expensive gold and jades and stuff that he wouldn't accept it. So I don't know. Anyway, when we go forward to the next chapter, which I don't have a lot to say about, just basically I'm glad the registration issue has been resolved. And I mean, they're working on it still, of course, but even Yao Wenyu is like, let's not segregate people, let's not segregate the OG citizens from the migrants, just because we're not going to be able to tell the difference anyway. Just have everybody working, doing their thing, and call it a day. And so now their next task is surveying the land and doing that before snowfall, because trying to do so in the snow obviously is harder. Like, that makes sense. It would be harder in the snow. And so we learn, which of course kind of already knew this, but everybody's understaffed, here in Suzhou, and they need literate people in the future for clerk positions. And so this whole registration thing is going to help them find qualified people, although there will also be people who try to scam and scheme and bribe their way into getting a position. So that's something that needs to be looked out for. And then as far as Gao Zhongxiong's story goes, I mean, the only thing I can say to him is, man, he got it bad. Now, I know technically that was about something else, but I just had to sing that. He's got it bad. So his story kind of sucks. It's kind of sad, but it is what it is. Then when we move to the next chapter, we have the common people in power are being corrupt. Corruption is everywhere. It's not just in the noble clans of people. It's also in the common regions with the common folk who have been given a little bit of power. Corruption is not delegated only to, the highest of the high. And it's just really sucky to know that even in cases like these, where there is so much strife, that people are still doing stuff like that. They're committing fraud and oppression and extortion of the commoners and covering for each other as well. And it's really sucky because, Shan Zichuan, Zhou Gui, Kong Ling, all of them, they're trying to build something stable and good here. And that's the last thing they need. And it's one of those things like you can't ever eradicate it all, right? But you want to nip that in the bud as soon as possible. And so, of course, we have Shan Zichuan. He wasn't able to get Kong Ling as his counsel, but I would say that his reward for would be Yao Wenyu, so that's pretty awesome. It's like, sometimes a rejection is just, waiting for your projection, so he didn't get Kong Ling, but he got Yao Wenyu, which I think is great because reasons, right? Especially reasons as it pertains to Xue Xiu Zhuo and defeating that sociopath. I'm calling him that, but I don't really know. But I'm going to call him that anyway. Yes, I believe that's the right one. Sometimes I confuse psychopath and sociopath, even though I really shouldn't be. But I believe sociopath is the right one. So anyway, moving forward, after hearing about, that little Xu official or whatever, then Shan Zichuan was like, okay, let's figure out how we're going to handle this. And it's like, let's investigate. Let's rule with an iron fist, but not necessarily right now. Let's just use him as an example. And, for after how he treated Gao Zhongxiong and finding out, he'd taken bribes and stuff like that. And he ends up being that example for the public to see. And it was funny that the officials were like scared about this because they thought, they would get a slap on the wrist or something. This would just be the example. They weren't expecting Shan Zichuan to follow through on his words, I guess, so it's like, yeah, they better get their acts together. But anyway, then we move forward, just, I guess, getting a little bit more insight on Yao Wenyu, which was fine. But yeah, they used a dead prisoner for that whole body situation that was mentioned in previous chapters to look like it was Yao and Yu, but the face was disfigured. But that didn't necessarily trick Xue Xiujuo, which of course it wasn't going to do that for real. And so we involved the Pan clan, of course, and Pan Yuan, he was supposed to be looking after Yao and Yu, really looking after, literally looking, while everybody else did what they were supposed to do, like the physicians feeding him medicine, the people, servants giving him meals and everything. But apparently this guy had a gambling problem. Okay. And this gambling problem ended up landing him in so much debt that he ended up getting help from some rando who paid it all off. And more than likely, this person was brought into his, line of sight by Xue Xiujuo because Xue Xiujuo knows that the Pan clan has Yao and Yu. And so this person that paid off his debts probably was like, hey, poison his medicine and I'll pay off your debts. But that guy's dead now, so it is what it is. Anyway, yes, the Pan clan is in trouble again, in impeachment. I guess it is what it is, So Xue Xiujuo is just, he's on it, is all I can say, as far as his instincts, if it's him, which I believe, like them, that it is him. So anyway, we have the princess becoming suspicious of why he's just like not getting better at all. At all. And so she's like, okay, well, also she worried that as far as the whole impeachment of them inspecting the Pan clan's fields and everything, I'm sorry, not her, but yes, her. Yao and Yu says that she probably believed they were using that as an excuse to come and capture him. And so what she did is basically, prepared people and money and resources to get Yao and Yu away. But as soon as they left, those people left with Yao and Yu, they abandoned him. Like, are you kidding me? That is so sucky. I was just like, dag. So anyway, yeah, like I said, we found out that his medicine was poisoned. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of his story. I will say, for the first time since I've started reading QJJ, chapters Zhongxiong and Broken Jade were probably like my least favorite. I was mildly bored, I guess, but I made my way through it because, I was like, okay, getting information on Zhongxiong and, more information on Yao and Yu. And also, I will say, I do feel bad for Yao and Yu, but I still haven't gotten to a point where I'm attached to his character. I feel like, of course, not every character, because if that was the case, it would be way too much. But, in reading QJJ, one of the things that I've realized is that several characters are easy to get attached to. For specific things, and it's going to be different for everyone. Like I know during our last live session, someone apparently really loves Yao and Yu. And one of the reasons was oh, he's good to animals. He's good to his cat, which is something that's not common in this time period. Although we do have plenty of people who are good to their animals, from Xiao Jiming to Xiao Chiye, the way he treats Meng and Snowcrest and Yu, and all of those animals are treated well. So I think except for the donkey issue, the people are treating their animals well. Even Ding Tao got him a little pet, although we haven't heard about that one in a while. But anyway, so people get attached to characters for different reasons. And I can personally say that for me, even with getting more information on his tragedy thus far, I'm not feeling anything for Yao and Yu. I was just kind of oh, that's a sucky story. That sucks. But I think out of all the characters that I've been introduced to, just kind of okay, cool. And that's pretty much it. So I'm interested to see where things go as it concerns him and Shen Zichuan, him and Xiao Tianya. I feel like that kind of thing, what I was thinking would be between them. Nothing has happened yet, which, those things take time. But from the moment that they met, back in Chudu, I was like, with the way that he was looking upon Yao Wenyu's beauty. So I am interested in that at least. But yeah, I don't have any like, oh my gosh, Yao Wenyu feelings. What I would like to get more of, especially since they're on the cover, is I want to go to Tidong to see more what's happening with Tiju Yin and also more with what's happening with Hua Xiangyi. Not necessarily as a unit, but I'm just saying like, I want to see what's going on. You know, I want to get into the scene with Tiju Yin as far as her investigations and figuring out what's going on with Lu Guangbai and just everything, you know, that she deals with, because we've heard about all the great generals, right? And I feel like all of the great generals, former and current, have kind of had their shine in some way, except for Tiju Yin and Lu Guangbai. So I just want more on both of those generals, because we got plenty on Xiao Jiming. You know, we got plenty even on Zuo Tianqiu. Like, he's had his time. And Xiao Fengshu, like, he's had his time. You know, it's crazy. I'm like, man, can I get some more of the other two generals, please? So I'm just waiting for when we get there, because I'm like, dang, I've read 166 pages and we barely got anything of her. So I'll be, like, I'm not complaining, by the way. I'm just, like, really excited for when we finally get to her. And Hua Xiangyi, since she's there and she's the Empress Dowager's, you know, favorite niece or whatever. I just want to see what is going to unfold because of this marriage, you know, and knowing where Hua Xiangyi comes from and what the Empress Dowager has planned. I'm wondering if like Hua Xiangyi is going to stray from those things. Like, you know, I'm just curious. Anyway, boy, I got really sidetracked. So anyway, going back to Yao Wenyu and this whole Gao Zhongxiong thing, he's telling Shan Zichuan ultimately that Gao Zhongxiong has a wonderful gift. He has the ability to sway the hearts of people. He's got the gift of gab, a glib tongue, right? He can make people believe that black is white and white is black. Right is left, left is right, you know? So that'll be interesting just to see, you know, how things go. So then, of course, when we get to page 140, we have Yao Wenyu and Shan Zichuan discussing things. And Yao Wenyu basically tells him, like, as long as you have the stain of your father's name, you won't be able to lead people openly or convince them to follow you. Which is really sucky, sad but true. Almost saying something that has sad but true in it. And that's really sucky, but you know, I get it. And so it's like Shan Zichuan needs to drop the vice commander title that he has. That was his Chudu title. He needs something else. So then we move forward, and Shan Zichuan is like, you know, for now, it's good to be a nobody, to not really hold anything. We can let King Yi in Fanzhou still do his thing, because right now, his position and the stuff that he's doing is keeping Tidong from coming to us, right? We need to keep it that way. And because everyone from Tiju Yin to the 8 great battalions, they have to be strategic in how they enter Suzhou, you know, to possibly try to get Shan Zichuan as a fugitive and to come get Han Jing and all that stuff. So it's like, it's a precarious situation. They can't just barge in there, guns a-blazing. So anyway, we move forward and we learn that the negotiations in Huaizhou went smooth. So yay. But the weird thing is that the commandant of Luoxia Pass kept asking questions about Lanzhou. His marital status, is he single? What's his Facebook relationship status, basically? And so I'm like, what? You know, and Kong Ling was like, yeah, let's not say that he's spoken for. We're just going to say he's still unmarried. Say what is, not, you know, what is supposed to be, I guess, as far as the marriage and all of that stuff. So, also, it's really sad to hear, speaking of this King Yi, that in Fanzhou, people are so poor and so hungry that they are eating each other. Y'all, every time I hear this, it makes me so sad. It made me sad in Thousand Autumns. It makes me sad here, because I'm like, no, I feel like we should not have to eat our own kind, because we are that hungry, that poor. And it's so sad, but also very disgusting. I don't know how people could be cannibals. I mean, I've never been in a position to even consider it. So who knows, and it's not only physical distress from lack of food, but it's also mental distress and all the other problems they deal with. So I don't know, because I fasted before for 25 days. I never had an inkling to eat my husband or anything like that, but I was still in the comfort of my own home. So who knows? Maybe if we were out in the wild, I would have been like, nom, 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 nom. So anyway, there's been some gossip going on that Sun Zichuan has been bullying and coercing Zhou Gui. And so Kong Ling is like, I told you to change your title, to hand him over authority a long time ago. You didn't even listen to me. So now basically it's like, okay, well, we need to give him a new title. They're thinking the same thing. New titles. Boom. So Zhou Gui demotes himself as a subordinate to Lanzhou and made Lanzhou the prefectural governor. And then we have Gao Zhongxiong, who is snapping back, number one, at King Yi for basically, like being like, oh my gosh, you're giving your authority over to a traitor. How dare you, blah, blah, blah. He's snapping back, and then he creates what I call the Tale of Lanzhou. And he is just raving about, like he's made an epic of Lanzhou going to Chazhou to give them grain and solve their woes. And it's touching the people's hearts. He's doing exactly what Yao and Yu said that he has the ability to do. But I just thought it was so funny that by the time this information reached Li Bei front lines, Xiao Fengshu was like, he lost an arm? I was like, nearly, Daddy Xiao. He nearly lost an arm. That means close, but not all the way there, sir. It was really funny. And then going into that last chapter where Xiao Chuye is basically like dashing out of his tent, finna dash his way to Cizhou. It was the funniest thing ever. And they were like, hey, this is the past. He's fine. Remember? You already saw him. His arm is still there. And he's like, oh. He's like, dang it, father. Like, you got me all in a tizzy. Like, I was finna spaz. It was funny. So then anyway, we move forward. And Sun Zichuan decides he's going to release Han Jin and let him do whatever he wants after he's been clothed and fed. We'll see what comes of that. But anyway. And then on the front lines, he gets a missive that's urgent that says that he's supposed to come to the front lines to speak with the Prince of Li Bei about the trade markets and everything. So then we have father and son spending time together. I absolutely love it. Xiao Chuye, Xiao Fengshu, just being in a healthy, parent-son relationship. And I am glad also to hear that Xiao Chuye is really taking his duty serious as far as providing provisions and everything. I think it was funny that they were deciding to race each other. But I have to say, I've got a bad feeling. And I'm not trying to put this feeling on anyone, but I am here to discuss my feelings, okay? I have a very ominous feeling, and this is a feeling that I've already had. If we go back some volumes, I think it was volume 3, when Xiao Fengshu came out of the shadows to go to the front lines again. I already stated then that I had a bad feeling about it, and that I felt like Daddy Xiao is going to meet his demise in this series. This chapter, Sunset Glow, y'all, I got a bad feeling, especially when we get to page 164. Yi Bai Liu Shi Se, something like that. Because when they're viewing this stone, right, where people write their names, scratch it off, put it on, scratch it off, put it on, for those who got here, those who have passed away. And, he's like, herein lies my brothers. I brought your brother here. Someone else was here. And, they're talking about putting their names in certain spots. And his dad is like, I want all the spots. And Xiao Chuye says, what about my mother? You'll be leaving her alone in the homeland. So I felt an ominous feeling then. But then when his father says, we can look at each other from afar, eyes to eyes forevermore, I felt more of that feeling in my gut. Like, I don't know. And then they're like, it is here we are born and here we will die. And then on the next page, it's like, one day I will return to her embrace. I was like, sir, do not say that. You are preparing me for what I'm preparing myself. And I don't think I'm going to be ready. But I'm preparing myself because I feel this is coming. Anybody else feel that, or is it just me? Anyway, so moving forward, we have Xiao Chuye is washing himself. And I was like, I think Shanzi Chuan is probably going to show up by the end of this chapter because of that whole missive thing. And then the page where it was talking about like, oh, the separating and reuniting of two people. It's so wondrous, blah, blah, blah. And I was so happy that, yes, they are reunited. For how long? I have no idea. But I've been missing my Tsujo. Like, give me more Tsuan and Lanzhou. So, but we stopped right here because I felt it was a good stopping point. So we'll see what happens in the next chapters because now Shanzi Chuan is here where Daddy is. Daddy Xiao and Zuo Tianqiu. So, I don't know. We shall see what happens. Anyway, those are all of my thoughts and some minor things going on politically that I felt maybe needed to be recapped. So I hope you all enjoyed these chapters. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions. And if you also have ominous feelings about Xiao Fangxu, or if y'all think that I'm just a little delulu or I'm tripping and I need to not speak that over his life, / death. But anyway, I Niman. Have a good day and or night. Niman. Yeah.